panelist and not on mute, please put yourself on mute until it's time for you to be recorded. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call the 2021 Annual Strategic Board Meeting to order. But before we get started, I have an opening comment. Alcor's annual strategic meeting today falls on the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attack. We should remember that, in addition to mourning the loss of almost 3,000 lives on that tragic day, our Cryonics community also lost 2 of our own. One of them was a member of CryoCare, an attorney, and an off-duty New York police officer who ran toward danger to help people. The other was an Alcor member and a finance professional. Both of them were killed by the collapse of the South Tower. One of my board members shared with me some ratios so that we can better appreciate the relative impact to our own community. The 9/11 fatality rate was 1 in 2 million deaths for the world, 1 in 100,000 deaths for Americans, 1 in 3,000 deaths for New York City residents, and only 1 in 500 deaths for cryonicists. We'll now take a moment of silence to honor the lives lost 20 years ago on that fateful day. Thank you for honoring our fallen with me. Let's get started. Margie, will you please read the Code of Conduct?
Yes. Alcor Life Extension Foundation welcomes the Alcor Board of Directors, Alcor members, and Alcor staff to this meeting. We will follow Robert's rules for debate and voting when not inconsistent with the Alcor bylaws. During this meeting, directors, members, and staff will abide by the following Code of Conduct. Participants shall wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. Participants shall not engage in disruptive, inappropriate, or harassing behavior toward others. Participants shall respect the privacy of fellow members and of Alcor patients. Speakers shall keep their comments to the subject matter being discussed. Fellow members will respectfully allow the speaker to finish. All directors, members, and staff will work to find mutually beneficial solutions to advance the profession of cryonics. The chair may limit discussion if deemed repetitive, inappropriate, or to continue progress of the agenda. If anyone needs a copy of the Code of Conduct, please speak now and a copy will be furnished.
Does anybody need a copy? Hearing none. Board, you have an agenda in front of you. I have an addition to the agenda. We will add Alcor Arizona Domicile to the agenda directly after elections, but right before board reports discussion. Are there any other additions or modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as modified.
So moved.
Second.
This is Michael Seidel. Thank you, Ralph. Anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Board, you have last minutes in front of you. Are there any additions or modifications? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Is there anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
And the ayes have it. Next up, we will do elections. First will be the Board of Directors. Up for re-election this year are 6 directors: Andy Megalou, Brian Woke, Michael Seidel, Mike Anzus, Mike O'Neill, and Ralph Merkel.
Don't you have
Is
to
there a
do a roll
motion?
call first?
No, we're not doing roll call today. Margie's captured it.
Yes.
Thank you. Up first is Andy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a, okay. Anyone objecting? Anyone abstaining? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Welcome to another year, Andy, of volunteer work. Next up is Brian.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Next up is Michael Seidel.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do I need to abstain?
Yes.
I'm going to put abstain on all of you there when you're being
Excellent.
put for. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And the ayes have it. Next up is Mike Anzus.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Next up is Mike O'Neill.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. And last is Ralph Merkel.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you, board.
I would just like
Next, we will do
to, Patrick, if I may, I would just like to express some thanks to Michael Riskin, who after 28 years of service did not submit himself for re-election this year. He's been a member of Alcor for almost 40 years. He was a former vice president and chairman of the board, and he was with Alcor through thick and thin, including the move from Southern California to Arizona. And just want to express the board's and all of Alcor's thanks for his many years of service, even though I'm not sure if he's attending today.
I second that wholeheartedly, and I'd like to thank the rest of the directors for their continued service.
I also like to second that. I wouldn't have made it through 4 years as president without Michael Riskin's support and advice.
I'll
His
second
presence
that
on the
too.
board will be missed. His presence on the board will be missed, but not forgotten. Thank you, Michael. Officers are up next. Patrick Harris for president.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
For secretary, Margie Klima.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone abstaining? Any objections? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. For treasurer, Dr. Mike Perry.
So moved.
Second.
Anyone abstaining? And nobody would ever object to Mike Perry. So all in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. All right. We also have on elections the ACT Board of Trustees. It's required for 3 Alcor board members to serve on the ACT Board of Trustees. And to Brian's very touching note, Michael Riskin was a trustee on the ACT for a long time. However, with his resignation, a new board member from Alcor needs to step into a trustee role. Andy will be up for re-election this year. Brian will also be up for re-election. And Mike Anzus has been nominated. So I'll start with Andy. Is there a motion?
Can I point out something, a point of order here?
Yes.
As it's Alcor's responsibility to choose 3 directors who then will be voted on by the ACS trustees. The ACS trustees, because of the way it is set up as a supporting organization, are the ones who make the final vote on the 5 trustees. However, it is assumed that we will vote on the trustees that Alcor approves as far as the 3 directors. I am the chairman of the Alcor Care Trust. That's why I'm pointing out that point of order.
Thank you, Steve. Yes. So note to the board is you can nominate your fellow peers to serve on the ACT, and the ACT reserves the right to say, no, we don't like you.
Correct.
Can I just make a motion that the Alcor board nominate, if that's the right word, for the ACT, myself, Andy, and Mike Anzies?
Yes. Yes. So when somebody says so moved, it will be considered a nomination. Okay.
So moved.
For Andy, so moved, right? Is there a
No,
second?
he was doing all three at once.
Oh, you're doing all three at once. So moved. Okay, good. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the ayes have it. All right. Now is the new agenda item that we amended, Alcor Domicile. Andy, I believe you've got a few motions to introduce.
Yeah, we have a slew of things that need to be gone through in proper order. So I
What's
move.
the first floor?
Hmm?
I was just saying the first floor.
Yeah. So I move that we approve the agreement and plan of merger and authorize the president and secretary to sign it after the 20-day notice period in California Corporation Code Section 6010.b.
There's a motion on the floor.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The
Patrick,
ayes have
do we need a few words for the public meeting about what these suite of resolutions is going to do?
Sure. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
Please go ahead.
Sure. So when Alcor moved from California, it was originally incorporated in California some time ago. And from that point in time forward, we've continued to be domiciled legally in the state of California, primarily due to a lack of resources that were available for Alcor to make that move. However, recently, we have been able to prioritize redomiciling here in Arizona. So Alcor will be legally domiciled and physically domiciled in Arizona, which is a good move for a variety of reasons that I don't want to expand upon because I could spend the next 20 minutes talking about why we want to be in the location where we're physically present. Are there any questions from the panelists about the redomicile to Arizona? Hearing none. Andy, go ahead and continue with the second motion.
All right. I move we approve the officer certificate for Alcor Life Extension Foundation CA and authorize the president to sign it after the 20-day notice period in California Corporation Code Section 6010.b.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. Anyone abstaining? Anyone opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Andy?
And number 3, I move we approve the certificate of merger CA and authorize the president and secretary to sign it after the 20-day notice period in California Corporation Code Section 6010.b.
Second.
Any discussion? Anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
And the ayes have it. And I believe there's the last motion, Andy?
I move we approve the statement of merger AZ and authorize the president and secretary to sign it after the 20-day notice period in California Corporation Code Section 6010.b.
Second.
Any discussion? Anyone abstaining? Anyone objecting? All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Congratulations. All right, with that, we're going to move into the bulk of the meeting. But before we do, Margie,
And can I
will you
ask
please?
one question
Oh,
of,
yes,
of
Steve, go ahead.
order there? When we in the future talk about Alcor or write something about Alcor, should we then call Alcor an Arizona corporation, or is it still a California corporation domiciled in Arizona? I want to make sure of the proper wording and when this turnover takes place. Is it in 20 days or is it today because it's 20 days from something that happened in the past?
All right, procedurally, Steve, what we're going to do is the Alcor California board just authorized a merger into a newly established Alcor Arizona. There will be an operational meeting with the same board as the founding directors for Alcor Arizona. The merge will happen between the two organizations, and we've gone through tax council and everything to be able to effectively have Alcor Arizona assume everything, including the tax ID from Alcor California. So it will still be Alcor, we'll still have the same tax ID number, we'll still have been incorporated no longer than really any other Cryonics, service provider that's out there since 1972. Our mission will remain the same. Nothing will change. Everything will come over. It's just we'll be legally domiciled here in Arizona. Did I miss anything, Michael or Brian?
Yeah.
We will no longer have any connection to California in terms of our corporate status, to answer your question directly, Steve. So we would not say a California corporation domiciled in Arizona. We will be an pure Arizona corporation.
Thank you. That's important wording. Okay.
Right. I mean, we will be an Arizona corporation, but the 20 days isn't going to start until council submits appropriate documents. So that clock hasn't started yet. So, I mean, sometime in the next 30 days, when everything's said and done and papered, Alcor will become an Arizona corporation, but that hasn't happened yet and won't happen for a date to be determined.
Thank you. Those details I think are pretty important for all of us to understand.
I would add, though, that there are some regulations in California we're still subject to because we, quote, do business in California. For example, we still have a requirement to submit financial statements to the state of California.
Thank you.
Okay. And thank you, Steve, for the question. For the benefit of those that haven't been part of this process, a lot of work went into it. So, Margie, will you please give some brief instructions to the audience so they know how to submit questions or comments?
Okay, just to let you know, the chat function is disabled, but if you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can submit your questions through the Q&A at the bottom. They are being monitored, and we will try to answer as many of those questions that we can after presentations. So as each person does their presentation, if you have questions, send them through and we'll try to answer those questions. Or at the end of the meeting, whichever works out. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Margie. And I may stop for a moment during, in between presentations just to see if there are questions, but we'll have an opportunity at the end as well to cover as many questions as we can. All right, let's start with the board report discussion. Barry Aarons is up first. Barry, is there anything that you would like to highlight out of your board report?
Thank you, Patrick. No, I think it's self-explanatory, and because you've got so much on your agenda today, I don't think I need to comment on anything unless anybody's got questions.
Does anybody have questions for Barry?
Barry, just a quick,
Barry.
quick comment. I can talk to you separately just to see if there's any moves on getting local politicians or officials to come on tours and that kind of thing, but I can talk to you offline on that.
Yeah, I think we're waiting for the board to tell us when the facilities are again appropriate for entertaining visitors. So as soon as Patrick and Max tell me that, we will go ahead. We've got a few people lined up and we're just waiting to get them scheduled.
All right, we'll follow up with you on that, Barry.
Thank you.
Diane, is there anything under your report that you would like to highlight?
Oh, hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We've been No, I'm waiting for our presentation earlier, but things have been getting very, very active, so that's good. So I don't have,
Okay.
unless anybody has
Thank you.
questions for me. Thank you.
Does anybody have a question for Diane? All right. Margie, is there anything out of your report that you would like to highlight for the board?
I don't think so, because we're going to be going over it pretty much in, Diane will be giving a presentation on what we've been talking about in automating membership applications.
Yeah,
Unless anybody has
very
a
exciting
question.
project.
Mhm.
Does anybody have questions for Margie? All right. Linda, anything you would like to highlight?
Well, let's see. In my report, I mentioned that all Alcor patients now have either a case report published or a draft in the review process. Brian asked me to double check that to make sure that something wasn't being forgotten. I've been working on that, and I'm close enough that I can say that I have like a 99% confidence that that's true. And I will send out a revised report to the board sometime next week. Because there are a couple of,
Go ahead.
Revised report, just because I did find, like, for example, the phase 3 case reports that I was asked to discontinue. I had not removed them from the list of things that were in the in-house review process. So I've taken those off.
Thank you very much, Linda. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, this is quite remarkable. That's a lot of work, and nobody's ever done that before. So great job.
Now, maybe you can thank COVID-19 for that.
Yes.
Stuck in home with nothing else to do.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Linda? All right. Blake, anything you would like to highlight from your report?
I don't think so. Like Margie said, almost all the content is going to be kind of expounded upon in my presentation. So I think I'm good unless anybody has any questions.
Hearing none. Sarah?
I don't think so. It's still just
Okay.
usual.
Any questions for Sarah? All right. Steve, I know you've been waiting. Anything you'd like to highlight in your report?
No, just to say that I did receive an email from Brian this morning on the board report, and Brian, I will respond to you later this afternoon, probably, or sometime this weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry about spending your weekend on it.
Yeah,
I just
thank you.
wanted to acknowledge your great work and not just be in silence about it. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. But otherwise, I have.
All right. Any questions? Okay. And Steve will cover a lot of it in his presentation as well, as will Jacob. But Jacob, is there anything that you'd like to highlight from your report?
Not at this time. No, the story is quite the same. I will be expounding upon most of the content in my board report in the presentation, and I could take questions now, or I could take them at the end of the presentation. Either works.
Let's go ahead and append any questions, and we'll handle them at the end of the presentation. So that's the conclusion of board reports. We got 2 committee reports. Jacob, you're up again with the Research and Development Committee.
Certainly. Thank you, Patrick. I've got a short update. Max reported that there were no material changes to the state of the research fund following the prior meeting. I updated the committee on the state of some ongoing projects, including new information we received about power requirements and cooling requirements for permanent CT installation in our operating room. Brian then discussed the state of an ongoing research project at 21CM and shared some status updates on the condition of 21CM's facilities and equipment. He noted that leading sections of this paper, which we think is an extremely important addition to the field of cryonics, have been written, and that data analysis remains to be performed. The committee and our attendees then continued a discussion about the prospect of more fundraising for the Hal Finney Research Fund, and Max noted that his focus would be directed at this goal, and since then, Alcor staff have been engaged in extended discussions about that topic. The committee then continued a discussion about liquid ventilation development and the state of the technology and the patent, which is essentially submitted to the USPTO as a pending patent. Notably, Alcor staff were able to determine the composition of the latest perfluorocarbon blend used in liquid ventilation research by Critical Care Research, which is a critical piece of information for the technology. Finally, the committee considered the preservation of the art of cryonics, which is the specialized and often unwritten knowledge held by experts in the field. We all agree that some more thinking and some more work should be done to ensure that experts are being trained and induced into the field so that the art of cryonics can be perpetuated. Finally, we scheduled our next meeting for Wednesday, the 15th of September, which is next Wednesday. And for the R&D committee update, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Does anybody have any questions for Jacob? Jacob, I just want to tell you that the R&D committee in its current form is working in a way that it hadn't in the past. And I am very, very impressed with your ability to chair the committee. Thank you for all the work that you put into that.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm gonna dedicate some thanks to the R&D committee also in my presentation.
All right, next committee report is SST committee. Blake.
Absolutely. So we held 2 SST committee meetings since our last board meeting. First one was held on August 17th. Topics discussed included a remote case update where plans are still continuing to advance. Sarah is going to be going out to the remote location to assist with shipping and making sure everything is packaged appropriately. We're also in final stages of sending out an updated kit to the UK. We were just waiting on some replacement squids to be manufactured, and then the kit would be shipped out after that. Sarah also updated us on Alcor check-in. We discussed the potential of lowering the age that we are offering it to for free to members that live alone to 55 and up, and Sarah was going to report back on that. We're also working on some pet companion case updates and clarifications. There was some confusion as to how pets should be shipped and should we have an official policy on that. And so it was decided that remote deceased pets should be shipped on dry ice. If for some reason a pet arrived in water ice, we would still accept that pet, but it would still not be perfused. I reviewed the current watch list. And then we also had a discussion and clarification of field neuro on full body. And it was agreed upon that it had actually been decided previously that if the timing is appropriate and a field neuro on whole body procedure is permissible, that that would be okay. And of course, in that case, there would be no cephalic isolation performed for those members because they are a whole body member. We also have worked on updating our necklace, bracelet, wallet card, emergency information wording, which was officially adopted by the SST committee and Alcor in general. And so I'm going to be looking into some different bracelet options, hopefully for membership, because there seems to be a desire for some softer bracelets or just some different looks to the bracelets. So I'm looking into that to see what possibly Alcor could offer to members in the future. And I also gave a rapid research task force update explaining that there would be a surgical training planned in the next coming weeks. And then our last meeting was on August 31st. We finalized a document that's a notice to coroners or ME office. The document was edited and met approval by this committee, so it can be used as an initial communication to coroners or medical examiners' offices as needed to kind of introduce, here's who we are, you have one of our members, patients, and here's why it's important that we don't autopsy and things like that. Again, reviewed the watch list. Sarah gave another remote case update. Seems like we are still within a couple weeks of making that happen. And again, the UK kit squids were nearly complete, and that kit should be going out soon. Alcor check-in update. There's currently 35 members enrolled at the time of the meeting. So Sarah is going to extend the complimentary service offer to members 55 and up that live alone. And I notified Diane of the new wording for the necklaces and bracelets should something need to be ordered going forward. And again, gave a rapid research task force update letting everybody know that we, at the time, we would be having a surgical training held later that week with SA, some members from Suspended Animation in attendance. And that rounds it out for me.
Thank you, Blake. Is there any questions for Blake? All right. You know, Blake, I know the SST committee is one of the busiest committees that are out there, and you consistently do a very good job at powering through agenda items in a very short period of time. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to transition to business presentations for the audience here. Jacob, I know you got some exciting updates. I'll put myself on mute and let you take it from here.
Thank you very much. Margie, are you okay to forward the slides for me?
Yes, can you see them?
I can. Okay, let's get started.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Graber, and I am Alcor's Manager of Engineering. I have prepared a presentation for you today to cover some of the things we've been up to in the last year. Next slide, please. Before we jump in, I'd like to briefly mention the Research and Development Committee. As you may know, I assumed the role of chair of Alcor's R&D committee last year, and since then we've had many meetings and very many productive discussions. So I'd like to extend a thanks to everyone involved with research at Alcor for your participation in the committee and your role in many of the projects we discussed there. So thank you, everyone. All right, let's continue. Research and development at Alcor has really proliferated in the last 2 years. We've got numerous exciting projects underway and far too many more we want to pursue. I'm eager to speak in detail about all these projects, but in the interest of time, I will stick to a reasonably quick overview of what's going on right now. Alcor continues to work on CT scanning solutions, and we envision integrating CT scanning into cryoperfusion operations to take in situ scans at a few points during the perfusion process. As we continue to analyze the results of current patient scans, this will offer an unprecedented look into the structural evolution of the body and brain during cryoperfusion, which we hope will be a valuable contribution to the field. Since our last annual meeting, Alcor filed its first patent application for a novel heat pipe-based approach to temperature regulation. These are conceptually unsophisticated ideas, but in practice, they're quite difficult to predict. So we've involved some third-party heat pipe professionals who are currently considering the concept further. Additionally, as I speak today, patents for novel approaches to liquid ventilation are being submitted to the USPTO, as I indicated earlier. We've been investigating some alternative approaches to the problems with existing techniques or perceived problems, and have nearly completed our benchtop model. It's currently under programming development. You will hear a lot more about this topic in the following presentations. Alcor's R&D committee funded a continuation of research into blood-brain barrier modifying chemicals, first investigated by Yuri Pachugin. Our associates at Advanced Neurobiosciences have just started this project in the last month or two, which we hope will provide insight into, again, cryoperfusion and physical changes to the brain and body during the process. We initiated the Readiness and Procedure Innovation and Deployment Project, which we've abbreviated RAPID, to simultaneously improve surgical training of Alcor staff and contractors, and interestingly for me, to provide us with the opportunity to perform tests of ongoing projects and newly designed hardware. There's a lot to say on this one, but I'm going to leave it up to Steve and Blake to discuss in the following presentations. We've then been working on some hardware upgrades for the Alcor facility for field deployments. We conceptualized and built a first prototype of a universal data logger, which is a device to improve and standardize collection of data in the field. Again, you will hear a lot more about this one in the following presentation. Lastly, we are testing a new alarm system with the ability to directly connect to the cellular network to deploy alerts. That allows us to circumvent the internet and any local power outages in the case that there's an alarm, and it can communicate with employees directly. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I've had the chance to learn some Visual Basic for Excel as well as JavaScript, which has been useful when interfacing with the web to pull information from various sources, which has been important for some new projects we're working on. I worked with an Alcor associate who kindly provided feedback and guidance, which was immensely helpful. And the results of these endeavors are exciting. So we've developed and continue to work on new tools for managing and visualizing case data, which greatly simplifies the task of plotting data for cases and unifies our graphs into a more consistent visual style. You can see here an example of a new style of graph we're trying out. And actually, we've even made some improvements in the last day or two to this graph. This is the cryoprotectant concentration in a field step ramp situation. So these data handling tools are still in development, and we have some more exciting projects coming over the horizon. Next slide, please. Last year, we were asked by a high-profile associate of Alcor to investigate whole-body cryoperfusion systems for deployment in the field or in a satellite operating room setting. While we weren't given the chance to actually build and test our design, we conceptualized a cryoperfusion system which minimizes required training and expertise of the operators without any theoretical compromise to perfusion quality. Alcor has been doing field neurocryopreservation for several years now, but field whole body procedures can go wrong in many ways, and it's a very complex procedure. But with these tools, we think we've made some progress towards a more robust and safe approach to field whole body cryopreservation. This is still very much in development, and it will be a ways out. Another project we call the Canada Cool Down System, which we concluded at the end of last year, gave us the opportunity to get creative while duplicating the existing cool down system. We created hassle-free tools to expedite the procedure, as well as just make it easier to use with less training and easier to clean up. We created and tested new fail-safes and alarm systems, wrote a new user manual, and just made the whole thing simpler and easier to use. This system is now deployed internationally to Canada, and we have remote staff who are trained to use it. Let's move on to the next slide. So we've made several improvements to ease access and safety in the patient care bay and the patient response vehicle as well. The patient care bay has seen a new suite of fill level sensors pictured here, installed to replace the existing sensors, which were a temporary solution turned not so temporary. Alcor's response vehicle gets its attention too, and we've added numerous tools and devices for mounting medical and mobility equipment to make our response teams' lives easier. In the PCB, we've also worked with Dr. Perry, who has been writing literally dozens of handbook entries by hand daily for decades. We worked with him to set up a new digital logbook system for manual level measurements, which we continue to collect. So now entering data into the logbook is really simple, and all of our data are automatically backed up to redundant locations. The digitized entries massively simplify the task of calculating doer boil-off rates and estimating liquid nitrogen usage. And the digital logbook may even have the benefit of reducing arthritis aggravation. With these PCB improvements as a foundation, we're working on a catalog of Alcor's doers and their histories to better understand and predict the behavior of each unit and its required maintenance. We have had to initiate some repair operations on the doers themselves, with minor flaws in how the feet of early units were designed, and after decades of bearing load, the caster wheels of a dozen early doers are so hard to roll that the task is injuring those who attempt it. But thankfully, we found a relatively simple, cheap, and low-effort strengthening method to compensate for those deformations in the doer's feet and replace the casters with newer proven ones. This project will be the first to take advantage of some of our new in-house manufacturing abilities, which I'll discuss next. Next slide, please. So we've been able to introduce several new manufacturing modalities into Alcor's repertoire, which for me is one of the most exciting things. We absolutely love getting the chance to work on these projects, and it's so satisfying to see things to completion. We've taken the advantage of convenient water jet and laser cutting and engraving services in the past, but we've begun to bring those capabilities in-house. We have fine welding tools, fixturing, we can do metal sheet bending and spot welding. We've got plastic manufacturing tools, laser cutting and engraving. Soon we'll have a desktop water jet system to make development easier and quicker. And we've even started assembling and designing our own printed circuit boards in-house. Other areas of the facility have been improved as well, including changes to improve sanitizability of our operating theater and equipment, which was an impetus delivered to us by the pandemic, but changes for the better. And we've also made some interior renovations and modifications specifically with CT scanning in mind. Alcor has seen a lot of construction in the past year, some voluntary, some emergent, but we've made it through the other side, better prepared for the future and with significantly fewer leaks. Next slide, please. Thanks all for listening. That's everything I've got today. I would take questions at this time, or we can take questions at the end of the business presentations.
Well, that is a whole lot.
Yes, sir.
You've been very, very busy, Jacob. So I'll start with board and other panelists to see if there's any questions that want to be asked of Jacob, and if any filter in, we'll from the rest of the audience, we might tackle a couple. Are there any questions for Jacob?
No questions, but I'd just like to say bravo.
Thank you, Linda.
I'll throw in a backup on that too. I've been very impressed with how much all the staff have been doing over the last couple of years, and the forward thinking of the committee here on doing the technical things is very impressive.
Thank you.
Right.
I want to say we really, really enjoy ourselves. It's been a fantastic work environment, and we have felt really productive. Both Steve and I have gotten the opportunity to work together and develop these projects, and there's nothing like it. It's fantastic.
Jacob,
it looks like you have.
Yeah, just a quick question. Circling back to your comment about the new automatic data logging capability, you mentioned that you back it up to redundant copies, several
Yes.
redundant copies. Just wondering how you do that briefly and where they're stored.
Certainly. So the system we're using right now is a cloud-based spreadsheet system. So the data is immediately synced with the cloud, and then I have been performing monthly backups. Those backups are stored offsite in encrypted drives, and excuse me, the data from the PCB is also backed up in those locations. So it's on the cloud, and then every month we get a periodic hard download, so a hard copy is generated.
Is that a service in the cloud or cloud storage that you've configured?
The former. So it's a cloud service. It's Google Sheets, but then we will periodically download to the local system.
Okay, good, great. Belt and suspenders, I love it. Thank you.
Ryan?
Jacob, on the slide that said powder 3D printing, is that is that metal printing?
No. Oh, I forgot to add that to my script. Thank you for bringing it up. We aren't able to do metal printing, but we do have a gypsum-based inkjet powder printer. It has some different manufacturing abilities, which sort of circumvent some problems with the hot glue gun style or fused deposition machines. And we got it real cheap. It's a $20,000 machine, but we paid $500 for it, and I had the pleasure of digging around inside and getting it working. So we're using it for some different projects. It has different applications than the plastic 3D printers, but we're still trying to find new projects to use it on. No metal yet. That is still going to be outsourced.
Thank you.
Jacob, it does look like you have a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Certainly, I see. So the local hard backup is not in a Faraday cage. However, I do have some ideas. I've got some locations we can sort of store those away. I think, did Blake just answer that question? Okay, thank you, Blake. The other question I see is, what do you think about getting an electron microscope image of the brains preserved with our protocol? That actually is a feature of some of the research that we have ongoing. We don't quite have the funds to purchase and install an electron microscope on site. However, we do have associates with access to electron microscopy, and we also have initiated some research with companies that can perform electron microscopy as well.
21CM has in-house electron microscopy capabilities, and we have data on from actual Alcor patients who consented to have small brain samples taken, and that's actually going to be published in hopefully the near future in some mainstream scientific publications. The results of Alcor's cryopreservation protocol on actual human brains.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any other questions?
I'm gonna cut questions off, Jacob, to advance the agenda. So very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Steve Graber, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I guess there's sort of a subtext here amongst the presentation, and that would be cooperation between departments. And I'm just sort of ad-libbing that right now because it just feels like I think we've got a really strong team at the moment. Everybody seems to be working really well together, so I'm proud of you guys. And it makes coming to work or working from home, in my case, quite enjoyable. Thank you. Well, listen, my hope today is that I can show you something possibly that you didn't know that we were working on that makes you say, wow, that's really innovative. And that would mean that I'm doing my job. But we frequently are reevaluating our existing processes and procedures. We analyze emergent ideas and technologies, and we follow the patient process from intake to storage with the purpose of finding safer, more efficient ways to accomplish our company goals. And you guys are a savvy group. You know that we must constantly innovate. So I'll show off some of the work that our incredible team has been putting together over the past year. Also providing you with a small glimpse at some Alcor projects that are either underway now or soon to be started. Next slide, please. We're not leaving any stone unturned in the effort to simplify tasks, improve patient care, minimize risks to employees and contractors, and improve efficiency throughout the building and beyond. And of course, innovation doesn't always mean throwing away the old and replacing with new. Almost always, innovation takes the form as a process of incremental refinement. And we really love incrementally refining things. So let's see what areas of the Alcor process we've been innovating in. And I'm just gonna list some of these off here. So field patient cooling and stabilization equipment, field surgical equipment and procedures, patient transport and patient handling, OR and field perfusion circuits. Next slide, please. CT scanning for perfusion analysis, patient and employee safety in the OR and the patient care bay, and patient storage system improvements. So now let's get started with my first bullet point, which is patient stabilization equipment. And this is done today using an external cooling ice bath, but hopefully we will be moving at some point to a liquid ventilation system. I don't want to talk too much for a couple of seconds, and I think you can see my mouse here. These are some of the key features of our recently submitted patent for liquid ventilation technologies. There's a main perfluorocarbon tank, a pump, filtration with a heat exchange chiller. We regulate the pressure on a continuously recirculating loop between these items so that the PFC is chilled and immediately available at temperature to the patient, and that is delivered down this main line here during infusion. During extraction, the process is reversed. There's a suction line, and the reason there's a suction line is because instead of having a pump in the return line, we were actually pulling vacuum on the main tank itself. So when you need to do an extraction, you trigger a solenoid valve, which basically opens the communication between the patient and the vacuum. So this tech has been in development for quite a long time, and unfortunately, there's been very little in the way of workable product to show so far. And that's because I believe fundamentally solving the problem of using lungs for LV cooling during chest compressions is really hard. And anybody who's familiar with liquid ventilation devices, with former liquid ventilation devices, might be somewhat confused by the fact that I'm missing a bunch of hardware that used to be required in previous designs. But that's because this design has some seriously innovative ideas baked into it. And LV is a pretty big topic, so as not to drag my presentation out too long, let's just focus on some of the juicy tidbits today. And a lot of detailed LV device information will become available shortly in our forthcoming report for rapid donors. Next slide. So to some of us, this topic sounds like we're describing the state of nuclear fusion, and the joke is that it's always 30 years away. But I'm gaining confidence every day that this particular LV design should be able to resolve major issues that have plagued previous LV attempts that have likely prevented them from being implemented in the field. So first, my system depends on an intra-lung pressure sensing for both infusion and extraction rather than a volume and time-based infusion extraction. And it will default back to volume-based infusion extraction in the event of a pressure sensing failure. So you know that we've got some redundancies and backups there. The system constantly recirculates chilled and optionally oxygenated perfluorocarbon liquid out to an automated patient infusion and extraction manifold. The manifold contains a high flow millisecond precision injector, which is capable of flowing over 20 liters per minute to the patient at a manifold pressure of 80 psi. As I mentioned, the device has no extraction pump within the PFC flow path. Perfluorocarbon extraction is performed by a suction, which actually that suction pump acts continuously on the main reservoir, not just partially. And that continuous suction serves to remove extracted gases and to deaerate the fluid before returning it through the recirculation system for reuse. The PFC extraction is also pressure controlled, so the extraction is also pressure controlled, but it does fall back to time-based extraction in the event of pressure sensor failures. And of course, there's redundancy throughout the system. Next slide, please. And here's just an example of a possible portable version of the liquid ventilation design. We've done some initial packaging studies, CAD studies on the different components, and there really should be no problem getting it down to this size and weight. And it's also possible that we can eliminate the need to carry water ice instead using a field replaceable and 100% renewable chemical-based heat exchange cooling cartridge. And that type of instant endothermic chemical cooling technology is available off the shelf today. But right now for LV, we're talking about that being a possible future enhancement, which would allow the device to be carried into the most difficult and inaccessible locations without the need for refrigeration or ice storage. You can maybe draw some conclusions as to how this might be used, but I'm just going to leave that particular thought dangling for the moment. Next slide, please. So in what way does this LV system differ from earlier designs? And obviously you saw that initial schematic that might give you some clues, but here's something that I didn't show you in that schematic, and that's the patient infusion and extraction manifold. The manifold from previous LV iteration being shown on the left, and a 3D printed engineering sample of my new manifold design on the right. The earlier LV version on the left requires to be placed on a special shelf or table placed near the patient, and the valve that switches between infusion and extraction is manually operated. That's the T handle that you can see here. And I remember very vividly, that might be one of the most vivid memories I have of visiting critical care research back in 2019 when I was researching LV technologies. I was just amazed to see Dr. Steve Harris concentrating on work and writing notes, but his arm would zip out to this thing like a metronome every couple of seconds and flip it back and forth, and it was pretty impressive. But to be honest, this manual method of valve switching is probably not ideal for field deployment. To that point, the entire device on the left has been miniaturized into the handheld manifold pictured in my hand on the right. And we've automated the valve switching to boot. So let's move on now to field surgical procedures.
Steve, we can't actually see your mouse scrolling around. All we can see is the picture itself. So just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess that's a little different than a normal Zoom meeting. All right, so let's talk about something interesting that we're developing for field surgical procedures. This is a method to speed up patient cannulation. And if you think of the perfusion system patient connection as simple fluid access ports rather than what we would normally think of as surgical flesh and bone, that requires a lot of skill. You know, when I look at this, for some reason, I'm reminded of the differences between AFAB and Atago refractometers. And I know that Brian Woke will understand what I'm saying here, but an AFAB refractometer was an analog device that required a lot of an intimate knowledge of calibrating and adjustments, and you basically had to know the art of how to use that particular type of refractometer. And then Atago came out with a digital refractometer. It's just literally you just plug in and you check the calibration on a regular basis, but it's never ever varied. It's always been perfect. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking to do here, is we're trying to simplify processes. And the result obviously is this carotid, jugular, and we also are working on some vertebral cannulas as well, which Jacob alluded to. Next slide, please. What's kind of fun about this little cannula is that it's a universal. It's small, it's 3D printed, it's got a barb fitting to allow direct plug-in connection to both the patient and the perfusion tubing. And aha, but wait, you say, that cannula won't work. Look how small that little exit orifice is on that thing. It's tiny, right? It'll never work. Next slide, please. But it will work if it's designed such that we can snip off or snap off the piece that isn't required. So now the surgeon can access the vessel, assess the size, resize the cannula on the fly to the most appropriate diameter, and move forward with immediate cannulation. Yeah, so that might work, right? So then what are those strange bulges? And for that, let's see a real world example of this cannula being tested by the team during our last rapid research training session. Next slide, please. And here's a photograph that's been colorized to enhance the carotid artery, in red, of course. And so we're looking at step one, which is access the patient carotids. The next step is to thread behind the artery and pull that thread out to expose the carotid. And you can see the thread being held by the surgeon's fingers on the left side of this image. It basically allows them to pull the vessel out so that they have access to it. And here we're also nicking the carotid to create an opening, but not fully bifurcating the vessel. And next step, next slide, please. And now we're inserting the cannula. This is a very early prototype. Didn't have the step sizing design, but it just so happened to be just the right size. We can cannulate jugular veins using the same method, and there may be application for that. We are talking about doing refractive index readings in field equipment, and so that may be a requirement, is to be able to have separated flow out of the jugulars for that. We do obviously have a concept for vertebral cannulation as well. And I just want to let you guys know that it was through rapid testing and direct conversations with Tom Wobos that we've been able to come up with and refine those designs. Next slide, please. So the last image on the right, you can see that we're using that thread that was used previously. So we're reusing equipment here in conjunction with a clamp, and it creates a secure watertight seal. And that's what those little balloon shapes were for, because that prevents it from being pulled out. And I actually went back and looked at the timestamps on these three images, and there was just a single minute difference between the timestamps. But I believe that it actually took less than 15 seconds to get this cannulated. So for traditionalists, a basket weave suture will also work with this new cannula design, but it's much simpler and quicker using a thread and clamp method. Next, let's look at a surgical innovation. This is a field data acquisition system. And just a little history here. We have basically always used off-the-shelf data logging equipment, data loggers for thermocouples and That's pretty much it, actually. And it's just not well suited to the type of environment that we subject these devices to. It may get immersed in fluid, it could get too cold to operate, and it could get plugged in incorrectly, or worst case scenario, the user can plug in a sensor like a thermocouple and press log, only to have stopped the device that was already logging. And the reason for this is not the fault of the operator. These devices have the smallest, tiniest little indicator that they're doing some sort of logging. It's actually incredibly difficult in a high pressure situation to keep track of this stuff. So what we're trying to do is to reimagine exactly what our field operators need and what we want to receive as far as data from the field. So in our OR, we have a full national instruments and LabVIEW software perfusion process system. So what kind of data do we want to retrieve from the field? We want a complete point-to-point data acquisition system that fits comfortably into a small Pelican case. If you plug a sensor in, the device will immediately start recording that channel. If you unplug that sensor, the recording will stop on that channel. This device will record left and right jugular refractive index. It's got 5 T-type and 1 MEMS type temperature sensors. You can analyze lung CO2 output with capnography. You can monitor lung breath temperature. And we're providing a heater inside the unit for dry ice temperature transport recording. That's one of the main issues we have right now with current loggers is when you send them along with our patient with the dry ice, no matter how well you try to insulate them, they get too cold and the batteries stop working. We're also going to be able to record arterial pressure and chest compression related pressures through the ET tube. The microprocessor on this device is extremely advanced, and it's fully capable of deep sleep states on every single interrupt, and it'll provide extended stored battery life. This device is under development right now. We're well past the hardware assembly stage. Jacob has done a bang-up job on the hardware, and it's currently in the programming stages. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about patient handling. I'm personally painfully aware of how susceptible we each can be to life-changing injuries or degenerative body conditions. And for some of us, lifting something even remotely heavy is contraindicated. But even today, we're performing multiple patient transfers inside the OR on every single case because they're just unavoidable. And for doing them, we're using a floor-based hydraulic rolling hoist that I designed and fabricated years ago, and it works, just barely. And it's sometimes very difficult to maneuver with a patient attached, so it's not the ideal solution. And with the advent of in-house CT scanning during procedures, our patient handling logistics are becoming even more complex. So for the future, we're going to want to take a closer look at alternatives to our floor rolling hoist. It might be an overhead lifting hoist like you're seeing in the image there, but it may be something else. I'm just pointing this out, and this is simply something that we're looking into to make Alcor a safe environment to work in. Next slide, please. I'll just pause for a second on this one. So I've been talking with other staff members about splitting the current 1.5 OR systems into 2 discrete systems for quite a while. I actually designed this a year ago. This is the compact neuro system for the OR. And just so that you know, our OR-based LabVIEW National Instruments Perfusion Process Control System, which we call the PPC, was initially quite complicated to program and implement. And because the PPC is now shared between 2 vastly different table systems, it's also complicated to set up and use on a regular basis. A lot of the sensors and equipment needs to be shuffled between the 2 systems. So what I've done is I've built a fully functional duplicate of all of the operating room PPC hardware and software systems, reusing our very expensive existing code base. And to complement that additional hardware, Hugh Hickson and I produced a design, which you're looking at there, called the Compact Neuro. And the hardware is completely compatible with everything that we're using right now. So there's not going to be any new learning curve in that situation. It's just this is a much more compact system, which allows us to put the patient directly into the bore of a CT scanner. A really interesting feature of this is also going to be an automated valve switching of the tubing circuit using solenoid pinch valves to control the perfusate flow path. And this is logic, switching logic based on the steps that we're already doing manually in the OR. This idea of valve automation belongs to Hugh Hickson, but I'm happy to pick up on great ideas and run with them at any time. And in a way, this story sort of feels analogous to my earlier story of Dr. Harris manually flipping the infuse extract valve on the old LV system. You can do it that way, but good Lord, why? Next slide, please. So we're looking at a major upgrade to Alcor. We had a portable CT scanner in-house for several years, but it turned out to be not well suited to our purpose. And instead, we've decided to move forward with the purchase of a much more powerful and completely appropriate medical grade scanner. And of course, Jacob already touched on the installation in his presentation. But we are in the midst of developing the architectural drawings required for installation. And I believe that that puts us into the first quarter of 2022 to be operational. And so our uses for a CT scanner, just to sort of touch on these, I believe that almost everybody on this call is familiar with, if you're familiar with Alcor and have been following us, you know that we want to use CT scanning to scan whole body and neuro patients during washout, but also at the end of perfusion. It's going to give us if we do it during washout, it's really going to give us a feel for the perfusability of the patient. How is that? How is the brain looking as far as flow? So for this, we're going to develop new whole body and neuro CT compatible OR perfusion tables. We're going to develop hardware and create a workable plan to retrospectively scan all existing Alcor patients currently housed in long-term storage. And then we're going to develop some CT analysis software, which should automate analysis of all of these DICOMs that come out of this process, generating consistent perfusion quality metrics for all of our patients. Next slide, please. In the patient care bay, we're looking at improving cool down monitoring and error reporting via the cool down failure alarm system. We're going to refine our cool down system cards to match with what was delivered internationally. We're going to renew our whole body cool down box by designing a more permanent lid structure. We're going to continue to develop the equipment needed to do whole body CT scanning and transferring. We are continuing to refine a plan to transfer existing patients into super doer storage. And remember, I said that these aren't all current projects. We're future looking as well in this presentation. So on that note, the last thing I'd like to do is give you an update on the super doer. Our supersized doer designed specifically for efficiency, and we deployed these doers with efficiency in mind. So you might want to know now, how are they doing? Well, we've now got 6 patients in our first super doer, and despite being at only half capacity, the per patient boil off rate is already beating the standard Bigfoot doers by about 10%. So when full, the super doer will use half as much liquid nitrogen per patient per day into the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. That concludes my innovation presentation, and I'm happy to take questions or comments now.
Wow, Steve, that's a lot of great stuff. So there may be questions that come in typed from the audience. Is there any questions from board or panelists for Steve right now?
Yeah. So the Super Doer is a great innovation And I think our transition to the super dewars will be very important in reducing costs for long-term patient storage for particularly whole body patients. Do you have any feel for how rapidly the super dewars will be put into service?
Are you asking when we see an end to transfers of patients into super dewars? Because I think that, you know, we're looking at a two-pronged approach. Obviously, all new patient, incoming patients will be transferred into super dewars. And then transfers of existing patients into super dewars is a much more complex and involved process that's going to require pulling them out of their existing Bigfoot storage in a safe method, finding a safe method to transfer them onto a CT scan compatible table while they're immersed in liquid nitrogen, transferring them onto a pod system, and then transferring them finally back into super dewars. 11 to 12 patients is what we're currently estimating can fit into each super doer. If we have one super doer in operation specifically for incoming new patients and another super doer in operation for transfers, and those transfers are done, you know, 1 per week, 2 per month. I don't really understand how the scheduling is going to work on that. I mean, we're talking about years and years. And I think this also has a little bit to do with how quickly we can get these built. During the era of COVID, it took 9 months to have one super doer built, but the nice thing is that they hold a lot of patients. The other cool thing is that once we have empty Bigfoot dewars, we're able to store 90 neuros in each Bigfoot doer. So I'm sorry,
Cool.
Wait a second. No, I take that back.
45.
45. I don't know.
Well,
where
that's
90
using
came from.
standard packing. There
using
are
standard-
some optimizations you can make with novel packing.
That's
if
right,
you
that's right.
devote the entire doer to
That's right, Ralph. You and I actually worked on that
55.
a number of years ago, and we did actually get 90 neuros into a Bigfoot doer. But if we use traditional pods with 10 slots, there's 4 pods, 4 whole body pods for each Bigfoot, and so that's 45.
Yep.
Yes,
Cool.
Brian.
I have 2 questions, both about the new liquid ventilation system. So you mentioned the use of endothermic chemical agents as an alternative to ice. I'm wondering if you did any actual calorie per mass comparisons on that, because water ice at 80 calories per gram is really difficult to beat in terms of efficiency. I think that the chemical agents are probably just a tiny fraction of that. And because with water ice, we can theoretically cool an entire patient to 0 degrees Celsius with an amount of ice that's equal to half the mass of the patient. If you were to do that calculation for a chemical phase change material, my prediction would be you'd end up with many, many, many hundreds of pounds of the chemical endothermic agent being used. So I'm just wondering if you did the calculation for the chemical endothermic agent.
No, we haven't done any calculations like that. And for Alcor use, this is not something that I even have in the plan for Alcor use. I am forward thinking to a device which can be used on the battlefield, for instance, and out in the middle of the desert in Afghanistan, for instance, where the nearest hospital would be back in Germany, for instance. And there's no ice, within 20 miles or something like this.
Yeah, well, in that application, it might be good enough because for therapeutic hypothermia, you only need to lower the patient's temperature by 2 or 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. It might be doable. My other question is, it sounds like you haven't given much consideration yet to the oxygen requirement, but because these fluorocarbon liquids are not especially good at holding dissolved gases, my understanding is that, unless Steve Harris has told you differently, that they intrinsically require the use of oxygen in them. And that being the case, I wonder if you've looked at the volume requirements for that and whether you're going to need an E cylinder, an H cylinder, or looking at a high flow concentrator, or if that's been considered yet.
No, we're not that far along in it, but I don't know if you noticed on that one slide there, it was kind of grayed out in this particular schematic. There's an oxygen injection circuit which joins the infusion after the high pressure, out of the high pressure side, entering the ET tube. And so if there's a direct mixing, because the PFC coming out of the injector is highly energetic, and at the same time we're combining that with a pure O2 injection, high pressure O2 injector at that spot. And it really, listen, we are still in early phase of this. We haven't tested this system out yet. We're still working on computer control algorithms. So once we get a little further along, we'll be able to address that.
Yep, just don't forget about the oxygen. It sounds like you haven't.
Not.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Linda?
Thanks, Steve. It's just a awe-inspiring report. As the person who writes the case reports, I'm very familiar with how frequently the commercially available data loggers fail in the field, hampering us from getting the temperature data that we need. My question is, how soon will the universal data logger that you're developing be available to the SST team?
Sure. So we're actually going to stage or do this in phases. The first phase will be a temperature logger only. So 5 temperature T-type thermocouple temperature loggers. And we're probably looking at 60 to 90 days to have that particular code written. It's actually the simplest part of the whole system. Capnography, refractive index reading, and well, another interesting feature of this, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is that because we're tracking refractive index, we'll be able to chime out alerts to the team as far as pauses and temperature change requirements and end of perfusion situations, so that they're better informed on those particular time inflections based on data. So,
thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hugh? You'll need to take yourself off mute, Hugh. All right, we'll pass over Hugh.
Wait a minute.
Steve?
Okay. Oh, here we
there
go.
you are.
I'll introduce you to compound Joule-Thomson expanders.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. We'll take a look at those later.
Very good. Anything else any other questions for Steve? Hey, Steve, I want you to take a look at a couple of the comments, actually in the Q&A.
Okay, let's see. Bravo, and well, thanks, guys. I appreciate that very much. Working at Alcor is absolutely spectacular. I just want to, on a personal note, I can't tell you how happy I am to every day wake up and go to work with my son, who is brilliant. He is literally brilliant. So thank you all.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Steve. All right, up next, Blake, looking to the future of medical response. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as everybody's echoed, my gosh, after Steve and Jacob, how do I even follow that? But I kind of have a three-pronged presentation here for you. So I'm gonna go through a handful of slides here that I've created, and then Nikki Olson, who some of you may be familiar with, has done a lot of work on wearables, and she was unfortunately not able to attend today. I had invited her to actually speak to wearables, because I know that's very top of mind for a lot of members. And she was kind enough to do some slide creation and actually did a recording of herself giving that presentation. So it's been pre-recorded, but we'll go ahead and go through that. And then I have a phenomenal interview testimony that's also been pre-recorded that Sarah had performed with Susan Harker, the wife of a recent patient of ours. And I think that's going to really be quite impactful. So I will start with my slides, and then we'll just kind of go from there. So go ahead, Margie, you can do next slide. So looking at the future of Alcor from my perspective, I'm going to kind of break it up into 3 different categories: medical response, SST, and surgical techniques. As you can see there on the right, that's myself and Dr. Tom Wolvos and Sarah Johansson of Suspended Animation. Recently, this, gosh, it was only about a week and a half ago now that we were there doing a surgical training with our most recent cadaver. Next slide. So to start with, future medical response. So this picture here you see is an older picture of Steve Graber in front of a plane there with the team getting ready to take off. But when I think about medical response, you know, I think Alcor check-in has really greatly changed the way that we kind of do medical response, and I think it's been a very successful process so far. And so it's been a really nice way for membership to be able to feel as though they're connected with Alcor because they are receiving this call daily to just kind of say, hey, is there anything new you need to report to Alcor? And it's not quite so invasive because you can also, you know, utilize the app and you can check in for that day. And it's a pretty, you know, non-invasive way to just check in with Alcor and let your cryonics provider know that you're doing well, nothing to worry about. On the flip side of that is if there is something new to report, it's a really great, easy way to be able to notify us and have myself or sometimes Sarah reach out to you to kind of follow up. And so we'll have people report like, oh, I'm going in for a procedure next week. And then that, of course, prompts us to follow up, or I'm not feeling too hot, or I'm headed to the hospital, or we've gotten a plethora of things like that. So it's been a really great way to just kind of open those lines of communication between membership and us. And of course, that goes hand in hand with our watch list. We offer Alcor check-in for free to any members that are on the watch list or are about to go on the watch list for some sort of planned procedure, or have just come off the watch list and may still be at risk for some, you know, post-op complications or things like that, where again, you can get this daily call or check in on the app to just let us know, hey, doing good, won't be needing Alcor services at this time, feeling good and healing well. So that's been really great. And then to add into that, I'm going to be doing some education with membership on travel notifications. It's been talked about through SST committee, but a lot of times we don't necessarily know, of course, when members are traveling. And of course, you know, depending upon where members are going, how long they'll be there, it can obviously potentially impact our response capabilities, our response times, and all of that. And so it's occurred to me and several others on SST committee that wouldn't it be nice if we had some sort of notification? So on the off chance that something does happen to a member while they're overseas or in some sort of remote location, that at least we have some level of orientation to what's been going on or where they're at versus, you know, getting this notification and we're looking them up in Salesforce. We have tons of contact info and addresses and things like that, which none of it would be relevant if they're on a vacation or things like that. So we're going to be setting up a travel at alcor.org is likely going to be the name. And there'll be a handful of us that will be on that, mostly those that would respond to an emergency alert. And that way, then, if something does come in, hopefully that will trigger somebody who's on that email thread to go, hey, FYI, this member, I believe, just sent in something that they're traveling right now. And to tie that back into Alcor check-in, we're hopeful that those who are traveling can also utilize the app as well. The calling feature would not work if you're outside of the United States, Canada, or Mexico, unfortunately. However, we believe that the app should be functional. There's going to be some testing done on that, where you could be overseas in a foreign country, and you could do a daily check-in while you're there, just to let everybody know that you're doing good and you're safe wherever you're at. And of course, the ultimate goal would be some sort of wearable technology that would tie in with all of that, and we would get, you know, near instant notification should something occur from a wearable device. Unfortunately, there's not a product that exists right now, as I don't want to steal Nikki's thunder, but she will kind of go through that. But certainly it's top of mind for everybody at Alcor, and I would argue probably most cryonicists, because we, of course, want to prevent those quote unquote cryo tragedies that can occur with delayed notification. So that's kind of what I'm looking at for medical response going forward. Margie, next slide, please. And so then, of course, following medical response would be SST. And one of the best things about Steve and Jacob are they have such an incredible mind for innovation that oftentimes, you know, you can kind of say, boy, wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be neat if, and whatever it is. And then before you know it, Steve's got some crazy product in front of you going, hey, you had mentioned that wouldn't it be nice if, and here you go. I've innovated it. It's in production. It's been 3D printed, whatever it may be. So I'm eternally grateful to them because there's really nothing off limits. If you can dream it, they can certainly at least attempt to build it, and that's been really great. And so as part of that, what's kind of featured here is a picture of the unified data logger. That's why I bring that up now. But one of my primary goals, and I've been beating the drum on this since COVID started, is local response training. We were inches away from hosting one in New York, and then of course COVID hit, and we all know how that's gone. So unfortunately, we still have yet to be able to safely hold a local training, but that is extremely top of mind for me and Sarah as well, because wouldn't it be great if we could have more response teams trained up, where while we are en route, there can be some first responders, doing some initial pieces of our protocol while we're heading out to the member's location. And so as soon as it is safe to do so and not put anyone's health at risk, we will absolutely positively be doing that. That is a very high priority for Patrick as well, I know. So we have full support of the Alcor team here. We just gotta wait till it's safe to do so. And then in conjunction with that, SST training with cadaveric organizations. So that has been extremely instrumental over the past couple months, being able to get cadavers. It has really changed the way that I think about training up teams because really historically it's kind of been a lot of theoretical, sit in front of a PowerPoint, do some hands-on with a dummy, but you don't really get any true hands-on with a body. And this has really changed that for us. And as part of that, training up a local Scottsdale team, I know that has happened in the past. And again, with COVID, that's kind of been put on the back burner. But as hopefully COVID clears up here moving forward, that would also be top of mind. And that can tie in with cadaveric organizations as well, because we are hopeful. There is a local organization that has explained to us that they would be willing to allow us to do a standby with their donors. And then upon declaration of legal death, we'd actually be able to have a team there to perform our SST procedures in real time and be able to do some of that actual training on a cadaver donor rather than, of course, training on a patient of ours. So that would be really great. And of course, the unified data logger, as Linda mentioned, is the owner of the case reports. There are many, many instances where, unfortunately, we lose data, or the logger doesn't work quite right, or it shows up and it's gotten too cold, and all of those pieces. And so I am so beyond excited for Steve and Jacob's innovation on that UDL, as we call it, because I think it's really going to be a kind of a one-stop shop, relatively fail-safe way to make sure that we can collect as much data. And the nice thing is as Steve has informed me with the programming and things, is it can be adjusted over time. We can add things, we can remove things as they may not become necessary to track, and all of that. So that's been a really great innovation. Next slide, please. And then to tie in with Steve's presentation earlier with that carotid cannula, that came out of a rapid meeting that we had, and I think it was just one of those "wouldn't it be cool if" comments. And of course, suturing is probably one of the more technical pieces of the surgical procedure that can be challenging to master, as Steve alluded to, the basket weave process. We do certainly practice it in our surgical trainings. I have gotten trained up on it. Sayre is pictured in there, got trained up on it. Sarah has been trained on it. So we are capable of doing it, but wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do that if we didn't have to, because it's much quicker, of course, to just be able to slide in that new cannula and clamp it as shown in Steve's pictures. So, we are looking at additional surgical trainings with cadavers. We have a pretty good relationship with one organization in particular that can provide us, relatively speaking, whenever we need something, we can get a cadaver. So, barring limitations on funds, we would be able to, host frequent surgical trainings, which is great. Surgical clamp devices, what you see in that picture there is a clamp that Steve has 3D printed that we trialed actually with our last cadaver. And we learned some things, and this is why those cadaveric trainings are so critical, because conceptually we thought that this would be a perfect product for us. And when we went to try it out, we realized that there were some pieces that probably could be improved upon. And so these are all really great things that we would not necessarily find out without being able to do these cadaveric surgical trainings. So it really has just been a really wonderful experience, very enlightening for me, and I think the whole team. And I think, to Steve's point earlier, it just really shows how it is one cohesive team. And while Steve's not necessarily involved in the actual surgery necessarily, he's innovating products, and Jacob's innovating products that will directly impact what we do as the surgical team. And so, it really is a well-oiled machine, and we all come together to come up with some really great ideas. And as part of that, being able to supplement the surgical team is always a good idea, of course, to have redundancy in staff availability. And so, I am hopeful that we can increase our surgeons that are available to us. And as a big piece of this, these surgical trainings will be key to that, because we can have a surgeon who's never participated necessarily in a Alcor case historically be trained on the procedures using a cadaver, and then we can feel pretty confident that the first time it comes down to it, they will have had some training on cadavers and will be able to assist. So that's really great for us. Next slide, Margie. And that's it on my side. I will pause for a quick moment for any questions on that before Margie pulls up Nikki's presentation to go through.
Any questions from the board or the rest of the panelists? Brian?
Thanks very much, Blake, for that. I have a question about the new carotid cannula design. At my place of work, all the carotid cannula that we use have a beveled tip. Have Alcor's carotid cannula historically have had beveled tips? Because it looks like these new ones don't.
It does have a bevel tip, doesn't it, Steve? I believe at the edge. You're muted, Steve, but I'm pretty sure it did.
Yes, it does.
So the slides where you showed it being shortened, being cut off, snipped off to specific sizes were kind of oversimplified, because the snip would be done to introduce the bevel at the point.
You'll just see that you'll see the snip at a beveled angle. It's going to be very similar. It's already been done. It's just that image happened to not be.
Yeah, and in fact, the one that we utilized that Steve had in his photos, that kind of, I think Steve referred to as an early prototype, that one did, in fact, it was not snippable, but it did have a beveled edge at the
Very
end,
good.
So.
Thanks very much. Great presentation, Blake. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Steve and Blake, I think Brian needs to get a really close look at it. Maybe we can invite him out for our next rapid experimentation training. How does that sound, Brian?
Yeah, I just I'm still in the process in my lab of figuring out how to clone multiple copies of me to have time to do that.
Fair enough.
But thanks for the thought.
Yeah. Any other questions for Blake?
There is a
Good.
question from Ben Best in the Q&A that I'll answer. So Ben says, will you require locally trained volunteers to be certified to participate in an emergency local response? That is certainly the goal, Ben. You know, as a vision of our local response trainings, we would develop a certification program within that. And in fact, I should say it actually has been developed, just hasn't been utilized yet because we haven't had the training. But Ashwin and Linda and Sarah and myself worked many hours on kind of developing what information should be required, and then actually testing as well to make sure that the concepts were understood. So we will certainly revisit that again when we do that. But yes, that would absolutely be the goal, Ben. So that way we know that there is a standard of care, and that they have been the local volunteers have been trained on that that standard of care that Alcor stands behind.
All right. Thanks, Blake.
Okay. Hearing nothing else, looks like Margie has pulled up Nikki's presentation here. So I will just I won't say anything more about it. I don't know. Nikki explains a bit about who she is, but Patrick enlightened me to the fact that there was a interview on life monitoring device on Cryonics Underground that Nikki did that many of you may be familiar with as well. So go ahead, Margie, take it away. And then obviously Nikki's contact information is at the end of this presentation. I'll make sure, Margie, if you could just hold on that slide for a few seconds before you end the sharing, just in case anybody wants to write down her email address. I'm certainly happy to answer anything I can, but obviously my big disclaimer here is that this is Nikki's content, and so your questions may be best directed at her.
This is my life monitoring devices and Cryonics presentation, tailored specifically for the Alcor 2021 board meeting. My name is Nikki Olson, and I'm a software engineer in the Seattle, Washington area. I began working on life monitoring systems after I started attending the Cryonics Sunday Zoom Hangout, where the issue of unattended death and life monitoring is frequently discussed. I created and tested multiple Cryonics alarm prototypes using off-the-shelf devices, including the Apple Watch, the Fitbit, various Wear OS watches, and the LilyGo T wristband. So in software development, we start with asking, what are the requirements? What are the acceptance criteria? What are the essential things that it needs to do? And so I've identified 4 here for our particular use case: prompt identification of probable death, no false negatives when used as intended, few obstacles to continued use, very little user interaction, it's convenient to use, and a tolerable number of false positives. It might not be 0, but it's not going to impede your continued use of the device. And we'll go into these in more detail one by one. So prompt identification of probable death. Here I think it's important to distinguish between what would be ideal and what would be acceptable for a first iteration. Obviously, immediate detection is ideal, but if we couldn't have immediate detection, what kind of delay would still be a major improvement over the current situation? And so here I have 15 minutes is better than 30 minutes is better than an hour is, better than 24 hours. And the current Alcor check-in app is once per 24 hours. And so even an alarm with moderate delays, say 30 minutes or an hour, would offer a significant time reduction on average, especially with identification during the nighttime while the user is sleeping. Moving on now to talk about false negatives or failing to detect a problem. I have an example here. It's a little bit technical, but it's the kind of solution that a lot of people bring up. So I think it's worth walking through what the problems might be with a solution like this. So the example is a wrist device that is triggered when the user's heart rate passes through a low or high threshold. For instance, the user's heart rate goes below 40 beats per minute or above 200. And the problem with a solution like this is that wrist devices, especially smartwatches, do not read heart rate continuously unless the user is exercising. And so if the user's heart rate passes through that threshold and the device is not taking a reading, then the emergency trigger will be missed. And you might say, well, then the next time that it takes a reading, it will discover that the user's heart rate is outside of that range. It's below 40 or above 200. And the answer is not necessarily. Actually, these optical heart rate monitors have a lower and upper bound in which they can read accurately. And outside of that range, they can give wildly different readings. So for instance, for Apple, the lower bound is 30 beats per minute, or it might be 20. But if your heart rate is 10 beats per minute, it could very well read 60 beats per minute. And so with the accuracy range being what it is, and the fact that they don't read continuously, generally speaking, some of them you can get to read that way, very few. This is a situation in which you would have a lot of false negatives. And now obstacles of use. I think people tend to overestimate their willingness to tolerate the inconveniences. I've listed here some examples of things that people say. I think in most cases, the average person is not going to put up with a lot of inconveniences in wearing the monitoring system. For instance, I don't think that a lot of people want to wear a chest strap. I don't think a lot of people would tolerate starting and stopping the app every time it was every time they took the device on or off, or face like an alarm going off if they fail to do that. The takeaway here is that the device can't detect a problem if the user stops wearing it. So or they're wearing it intermittently. I think so. The device has to be convenient and it has to be desirable to wear. False positives kind of speaks for itself. The alarm goes off and nothing's wrong. The key thing with false positives to consider is that in order to mitigate them, you have to add more technology. You have to add more sensors and more capabilities. Like, you can't just have Bluetooth. You ideally have Wi-Fi, and really ideally you'd have LTE. You want to be able to robustly distinguish between whether there's a problem with the person, there's a problem with the device, or if there's a problem with the use of the device, like is it being worn or not. So you need a proximity sensor on the wrist. All of these things, they come with the cost of battery life, but also most of the devices don't have it all. They'll have some selection of these features, some sensors, some communication mechanisms, not all of them. So it's another important thing to consider. And now the devices. So as I mentioned before, I've written and tested Cryonics alarm applications for the Apple Watch, Fitbit, Wear OS, and LilyGo. I've also investigated and experimented with Tizen OS, the Samsung devices, and PineTime, which is a very early stage, Linux attempt at a smartwatch. I don't think, as I said before, that chest strap direction is desirable. And people ask me about rings. What about the Oura Ring? They don't share the data with third-party developers, and since the battery is small, they're not transmitting data. Basically, the data stays on the ring until you open the app, so it's not possible to use the Oura Ring either. And these are some pictures of the devices. I don't have all of them. I sent some of them back. I lost track of a few of them. I wish I had documented this more along the way. On the right is a picture of the first prototype. So that's a iPhone application and companion Apple Watch. I think that's the Apple Watch 3, which is where we started. And then there's some developer debug stuff on the screen. It's mostly just a very basic prototype that was based on heart rate and motion. Okay, now talking about the problems. There's quite a few. I'll go through these quickly. A major one that a lot of people don't consider is that optical heart rate monitors, most of them will read a heart rate on an inanimate object. So for instance, Apple Watch, Fitbits, some of the Androids and the Samsung. In our use case, a Cryonics patient passes away, these devices will still read a heart rate on that person. If you put them on a stuffed animal, on a desk, on a bed, they read heart rates. There's no reason to think that they're not going to read a heart rate on a human that has passed away. For the ones that don't, what they do is they enter a cannot read status, but that cannot read status, it can occur for a number of reasons, even when someone's wearing it and they're alive. If the band is too loose, or you move your wrist and it kind of falls away from your wrist, or you're moving a lot. So that isn't a reliable signal that something is actually wrong either. And so this is a critical problem with optical heart rate monitors. I may have found a way around this, I will talk more about later, with some of them. When you can get the raw data, I think you might be able to distinguish. I'll go into that later. Just going through these other two quickly here. Most of them won't let you monitor continuously. They're optimizing for battery life, and so they only let you run your application sometimes every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It really depends on the device. So what we were talking about before, missing readings, I mean, this is a major issue. Wrist detection, being able to tell whether the user is wearing it or not. It's either not present, faulty, or in the case of Apple, they know whether you're wearing your device very accurately, but they don't share that with the developer. They're protecting user privacy. They won't tell you if your user is wearing the device or not. This is an example I wanted to give you. This is a Samsung Galaxy watch. here we are reading the heart rate of a desk, and it enters this status, unable to measure, tap to retry. Okay, so this is an inanimate object. It can't find a heart rate, so it enters this state. So you think, well, that's great. We'll just sound the alarm because there's a problem. But oh wait, it's on my wrist, and I assure you I was alive, and the watch entered the same status. And in this case, it was because it was not being worn tightly enough. But as I mentioned before, it can enter this state quite frequently, and so it's not a reliable signal. This is a little bit more of a complicated slide. I actually maybe shouldn't spend too much time explaining this, but basically, as I mentioned before, if you can get the raw data, you might be able to distinguish between whether something is alive or not, and that's by computing the signal to noise ratio. Basically, if you're an inanimate object, there should be basically no signal within the noise. These devices, they pick up a lot of noise, and they try and find a signal within that noise, a heartbeat. And so by doing a couple of calculations here, very special Python libraries that were actually conveniently optimized to do these kinds of calculations, it looks like I was able to distinguish between the chicken and the chicken drumstick and myself. I chose that. I think it's the closest thing I think of as like something close to an inanimate human wrist. And so there may be a path forward if you can get the raw data for the heart rate, not like the process data the OS gives you. But it's very data intensive. And this particular solution that I wrote, this is the Fossil watch, the battery life just drained really rapidly. And so I'm not sure. There may be a way to like optimize this. Maybe I could have written it more efficiently, so on and so forth. But I mean, this is a major problem, and there may be some kind of solution here. Going on to the rest of the problems here, just trying to go through these quickly. People propose other kinds of sensors. Body temperature won't work. Body temperature drops too slowly after death. Wrist O2 sensors won't work. They're too temperamental. You can barely get them to read even when you're trying. And the ECG on the watch, not possible because it requires active user engagement. The user has to put their finger on the crown. And like I was mentioning before about battery life, when you're monitoring frequently and transmitting data frequently, you drain the battery very quickly. Fitbit has a really good battery life compared to the others, but it relies on Bluetooth, unfortunately. And this, I think this picture, if all of those details were just like too much and just, you want to know what you could take away from that, this is the Apple Watch 6. It's the latest and best, smartwatch, by a lot of people's standards. And we have a stuffed Brontosaurus here. Life finds a way. It has a heart rate of 88, apparently, according to Apple. So why do these devices run into the issues? Well, they're not optimized for our use case. They're basically there to give you a rough estimate of your heart rate and the amount of steps you've taken that day. They are running up against battery life limitations, and so they're trying to preserve that. They don't want to give you access to running your programs all the time, transmit a bunch of data. But I do think they will get better. I think Apple is heading in the direction of health monitoring. But I mean, even if they do, I heard a rumor that they're going to do like glucose monitoring. They might not tell the user or the third-party developer that information. And now for some optimism, possible paths forward. I didn't want to create a presentation and just braid you with all the problems without offering any solutions or paths forward. So one path forward I really think might be essential for the first iteration of a product like this is partial day monitoring. Specifically just at night. There's a great product, for instance, called Early Sense that is actually, it goes under the mattress and it measures heart rate and movement in a different way than other devices. And I believe that you can put a phone number in for it to call. Maybe we could digitize that and triage it. And also some of those more battery intensive solutions that I proposed, if you're only going to be wearing it at night, then it only needs to run for 8 hours a day, so possibly you could implement a more battery-intensive solution and aim for partial day monitoring. I don't think building it from scratch will work. It's very expensive and time-consuming. It wouldn't have a lot of other features. And there's some other things to consider, though, if you don't build it from scratch. What if they do a software update that breaks your app, or the hardware that has all the specs that you need gets discontinued? So I don't know, I just added more problems at the end of that optimism there. As a summary, I I think the existing wrist devices cannot sufficiently meet our requirements, as outlined in the beginning there. I think that the problem extends well beyond the problem of accurately detecting death. I think you have to consider the user and whether they would comply with the requirements, you know, how often they'd have to charge it, how much interaction it requires. And I think the problem will likely have to be solved incrementally. For instance, starting with overnight monitoring, rely on multiple systems perhaps, and accept that immediate detection of death is probably not possible in the first Cryonics specific device. So yeah, that's it. If you wanted to work with me on this, please email me. So far I've built a bunch of prototypes, but then there are a lot of things that I wish I could do that I don't have the technical skill to do. So yeah, please reach out.
Margie, if you could just go back just to that last slide, just to make sure anybody who wanted to write down her email address is able to. Or I suppose we can also post it in the chat. So we can go ahead and do that. Thank you, Margie. Like I said, if there's any direct questions, they should probably go to Nikki. But if there's any general questions that I could potentially answer, but obviously Nikki's done a boatload of work on this, and she certainly is motivated to try to find a solution for this.
Doesn't look like there's any questions specific to that presentation. Blake, thank you for reaching out to Nikki and working with her to pre-record this.
Mike O'Neill wanted to
absolutely.
say something.
Yes, I was trying. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, yep.
Okay, good. You know, I just wanted to say that was an excellent presentation. But unfortunately, she came to the same conclusions that me and my students did looking at it for a year, for all of the same reasons. And it's unfortunate because you look at it and you think, oh, the Apple Watch is going to be able to solve this problem. But, you know, as she said, battery life, interfaces that are hidden from you, inaccurate sensor readings, not being able to have access to raw data, all of those things are real stumbling blocks to moving it forward, and it's really unfortunate. I just wish there was better news. I was hoping her presentation would have made breakthroughs that me and my group didn't. But it was a very good presentation, and I think I would like to reach out to her and talk about, because I have a few ideas that might be helpful. But thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. Somebody else has commented as well. A few people have wanted the email address posted. So I will, as soon as I get this next piece introduced, I will go ahead and post that in the chat. So the next presentation is a interview that I alluded to earlier that Sarah actually did with one of our patients' wives, Susan Harker. For those of you who read Cryonics magazine, David was featured on the cover a handful of issues ago. So you may be familiar with his story. It was a really unique opportunity. David chose Death with Dignity, and as an Alcor member, we were able to work with him and his wife, Susan, to kind of get everything in place, and we had a lot of warning time to kind of get this to go as smooth as possible. And so I just wanted to kind of present to the board and the members that are on just kind of her perspective on this. She is not a cryonicist. She is not an Alcor member. She'll talk about that as well in the interview. So my one disclaimer to this is please be very forgiving. She does use cryogenics a handful of times rather than cryonics, because she just doesn't necessarily speak all the same lingo as we would. So please be kind and forgiving of that piece. But I think it's a really great message, and I think it'll be a great firsthand testimony to everybody on this call to just kind of hear how great of a team we really have, and when our members need us most, we're there for them. So Margie, if you could pull that up and start that up.
Can you see it?
We can.
Okay, just a second here. It's of course in front of my, I'm having technical difficulties. There we go. Okay, let me just make sure I've got the sound on. Okay.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for joining us today. Susan is David Harker's wife, who started as a member in Alcor in 2013. He chose death with dignity due to follicular dendritic cell carcinoma, which is an incredibly rare cancer, and then was cryopreserved with Alcor in August of 2020. So we're here with Susan just to kind of discuss some of that. How did you feel when David signed up with Alcor?
So David had talked to me about, had been talking to me about it since we got married. So it wasn't as if he got a cancer diagnosis and then said, oh, and by the way, I want to be cryogenically frozen. So, you know, that's a topic that, you know, it's still a very non-mainstream thing. And so David's a futurist and a believer in science. And so his only religion was the belief that science and technology was the path to the future. And you know, he was very much a future thinker. So he kind of started introducing the family. I mean, he talked to me about it and about what it meant. And we talked to our kids ever since they were little. When my mom died, my son was 6 years old and asked me what was going to happen. You know, where did she go? Where was she going to go? And I said, do you mean like heaven? Or I said, and he said, no, Mom, what are they doing with her body? And I said, well, and I said, some people want to be buried. Some people want to be cremated. Some people want to be cryogenically frozen. And when and he said, well, what does she want? And I said, she wants to be cremated. And he said, I want her to be frozen so I can see her again. So, I mean, you know, we talked to our kids about it and David had talked to me about it. So I knew from, you know, pretty early on in our marriage, honestly, that this was an anvil hanging over my head. And the reason I say that is because it was important to him. And so having the responsibility for making it happen when he wasn't able, you know, was a big responsibility, I felt. And he also introduced the family to this book, The First Immortals, which have you read that, Sarah?
I actually haven't, but I'm going to check it out.
It's by James Halperin. It's a sci-fi book, but it's exactly about this. And it was a great way to bring people into what cryogenics is about. In a very accessible way, in a novel form where you really identified with the characters, and it kind of normalized cryogenics. It was a good read, but it was a great introduction and kind of normalization to cryogenics and what could be the aftermath of the cryogenic process. So, you know, that was terrific too. So when he was diagnosed with follicular dendritic cell sarcoma, which is a very rare cancer, and you know, there's not a very high. It's a matter of how much time do you have, and it's because no one's kind of been cured from it. You know, it was time to. I wanted him to let's start this membership already. We've been talking about Alcor for 20 something years, and he had looked at Alcor and he'd looked at an organization in Michigan, and he decided Alcor was by far, you know, way far ahead in the field and the, you know, the top of the field and the way to go. And so, you know, honestly, how did I feel? I felt relieved when he became a member, because then I'm like, okay, good. We can get, you know, if something happens, I know that we've got this in place.
As a non-Alcor member, what was it like for you to be able to work with Alcor to fulfill your husband's wishes?
Well, I mean, the team, you guys were terrific. I mean, you were informative, responsive, and most of all, human. You know, you're dealing with a family who's losing a loved one. And, and that's hard. It's hard for the family. It's hard for you guys, I imagine. And so the human side that we got was wonderful. And, I really felt it was COVID. So, this was a difficult process to do. There were a couple of things that you guys hadn't done so much before, like have ICE in the field in a death with dignity case I think it was maybe one other time you guys had done that, because death with dignity, I mean, there's very few states that you can do that in. And David wanted, he wanted to be here where he could do death with dignity rather than come down to Arizona. Like most, I think, is typical for most Alcor members. So we had to do, it took a little while to get the plan put in place. And it was COVID. So everybody had to be a little bit flexible. And it was just terrific working with a team that was so dedicated and so willing to do this. It was so important to David, during a time when, travel was, it was COVID. And, to be able to travel up and get this done during that time, I was just really grateful. It took a little bit, like I said, to get the plan in place. And then at one point, I think ICE required legally someone to declare death. Well, they don't do that here when you're in hospice situation. So I had to go find a registered nurse. That was really stressful. I spent a week calling. There's not a lot of nurses who want to participate in this sort of thing. So I ended up finding one who was on sabbatical and was very happy to do so, but they needed a pronouncement of death before they could remove him for the procedure. And so that got thrown into the mix about 2 weeks before the event. So that was a little stressful, but it worked out and we got a lovely person. But, I would say overall, the experience in working with Alcor and ICE was wonderful.
Thanks, Susan. We were happy to be able to be there for him and for you, and to make sure that his cryopreservation went so smoothly, because it did take a lot to get everything put in place, especially since it was a death with dignity case.
Exactly. And I think everybody just really problem solved and worked hard to make it work. And I was just super appreciative, and the communication with us was great. And like I said, I think the human element, at no point did people forget that you're losing your loved one. There was a tremendous empathy and kindness in the process that was greatly appreciated.
What was the process like when he realized he needed to start planning these procedures?
David is, well, first of all, he's a planner. And secondly, I think it was very smooth. I mean, he's a very rational person, and really just looked at what did we need to do and work with me in getting the pieces put into place in a very methodical fashion. So, there wasn't, I think the process was great. We got on the phone with Blake. I got my questions asked. For me, the stress was not knowing what I needed to do. And I needed to be very clear on what I needed to do to make this happen in the right way. And so, we got there, and, we were on the phone several times as you guys, and worked out the plan that was going to work. And, the communication was regular and informative. And anytime I had questions or any level of concern, the responsiveness was terrific. So, like I said, I feel like we all went into problem solving mode, and you guys did a great job of coming up with a plan and a way to do this that accommodated David's wish for death with dignity, that was an in-field procedure. And it went off really, really well. I mean, the process itself, once we put it into motion with David, it went great. And I can't tell you the relief that I and my kids felt when it was done and we knew his, it worked. It worked.
Yeah, because this is one of the rare cases where you can plan for absolutely everything beforehand. So I think things went really, really smoothly.
Yeah, I guess from that standpoint, that it was a plus because we had the planning time, because we had some time and we knew the date, and which is, most often not the case. So that was a plus in a death with dignity case. It wasn't running around, the person dies and you're like, I gotta call Alcor, and things were ready to go, and we had a staging station in the garage to get oxygen flowing immediately after death was pronounced. And so the procedure itself you guys just did an amazing job.
We were able to be there incredibly quickly and get things rolling, and then the funeral service was able to pick him up quickly after that as well.
I don't know if you knew this, Sarah, but the woman that worked in the funeral home, she stayed with him all night long. And she stayed and watched through the procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually wrote me a note about how honored she felt and to be included in that process, and that she would love to work for Alcor.
Oh, that's so sweet. I didn't know she wrote the note, but she did stay there all night with us, and she was actually very involved in what we were doing, and was super interested in learning about it, and was so incredibly supportive throughout the whole thing.
She was just so impressed and interested, and she told me that she would love to work for the organization. So it was great that in this process somebody else got educated. And because I think there needs to be a lot more education about cryogenics. The whole death meme is so powerful in our society, and it's there's a lot of people who are like, what? I mean,
right. And then they were also very supportive of the doer urn. So David was actually the first, or your family was the first recipient of the doer urn, and they worked with us for that as well.
My kids love those, and they each have kind of their own altar with the urn on it, and something. I sent you pictures of them, of each of them in their house, and Julia's had a picture that she had done for her dad for Father's Day, of him when he was in his 20s with long hair and whatnot. That's hanging above it, her artwork. So that was such a lovely gift for us, and it very, very meaningful for my kids.
It was so touching to see what they did with it, because I know he was so into D&D from like the brief moment I was in your home, because I know he had his D&D room, and it's just so sweet.
And playing D&D with the kids, I mean, that was one of their favorite things to do with their dad. I mean, it was so creative and fun for them. So I love the little altars they made.
It was so touching. Thank you for sharing with us. I think this will be a great addition to the board meeting that we have coming up.
Well, I think it's a great idea for you guys to, share stories of people who have gone through the process with the board, because, it's not an everyday occurrence. I mean, there aren't that many cases or opportunities for them to see or talk to people. So I think it was a great idea for you guys to, include this segment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being involved.
No, my pleasure. I can't tell you how much I appreciated you all last year, and the great work that you did, and just how well it went and how wonderful you were to work with.
You as well, because everything just had an answer. It kind of fell into place, and your whole family was so cooperative, and we absolutely appreciate that.
But, you know, this was something that, and, you know, I don't know, my kids might become Alcor members. I might, I don't know. But it was really important to David, and we were going to support that in every way we could.
Wow.
Yeah.
That brought me to tears.
Blake and Sarah, and of course the rest of the team, thank you for getting that feedback from Susan. Hearing that from someone that is not involved in the Cryonics community, I think it's very different than what people might have heard in the 1980s or the 1990s or even the early 2000s. It is truly a testament to how far we are coming as an industry and as an organization. So thank you all.
Can we put that on the website for, you know, a testimonial of a non-member who had the family loved one crowd?
Let's talk about that maybe with a smaller audience and keep moving this forward, Diane. But I am glad that you took yourself off mute because you are up next.
All right. All right. Margie's going to get the screens up for us. All right, everyone. I am happy to announce that the automation of the Alcor Membership Services Department, after several years of planning, is moving forward. All right, next. All right, we've updated the website last year, as you know. Incredibly, our request for information packets went from around 85 to 90 per month to over 250 per month. I just checked before I got online here. It is September 11th, and we already have 220 from September alone. And when we're done, I am confident we're going to turn these requests into full members when we're finished. We worked with Salesforce consultants, and we interviewed 4 different companies who work with nonprofits in automating their online presence, and we chose one. We had our first meeting to set up our scope of our next steps in automation. Our contracts have been finalized with Salesforce for the additional applications that we're going to need. This includes the member portal, the automated email responses. We're getting those things ready to go. And then the updating of our contracts and pricing models is almost complete. So we're got our first set ready to go. All right, phase 1, automation. Well, we're developing our new online application process. We've just started that. We are making sure that we're going to make sure that the data entered from the website is secure and encrypted. This will also create and populate their new Salesforce records, assigning them an Alcor number and all that as well. Alcor, the applicant's going to receive emails automated from the system with each step that they complete. The system's also, it's going to allow us to send emails and engage with the applicant, you know, asking any questions, addressing concerns, things like that as well. The membership contracts would be created and emailed to the applicant for electronic signatures. I am really, really jazzed about this feature here because this is a really challenge to get people. And I've been getting asked quite frequently, even more so since the COVID started, when are we going to do the online signatures? So that's on its way. Okay, so our next steps. Scoping. We're working with the consultants and to find our new initial parameters for the online application process. We're just getting that started. Integration and design. Well, we are trying to think of frequently asked questions and, you know, going through the process. What questions do people normally ask and address? So we're going to have those already all set up and have an email response for it ready to go as well. And then pricing models and contracts. The Alcor leadership and board of directors are actively completing this step and will hopefully be done soon. We're hoping to have this up and running hopefully by the beginning part of 2020, just in time for Alcor's 50th anniversary. So ours is a little bit shorter than the last ones you saw, but we are really moving forward on this, and Margie and I are really excited about this. Oh, who has questions? Everybody?
Good stuff.
Yes, this is going to be, I'm really excited about this. This is going to really save a lot of time. And like I said, I'm getting a lot more questions of when are we going to automate? So I'm happy to tell everybody that we are in process and it should be done soon.
Just a quick comment. I think you said hoping to get it up and running by 2020. I'm sure you meant 2022.
2022. Oh yeah, and I got
Yeah.
2022 on there. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're hoping to have it up, at the beginning of 2022, which is our 50th, Alcor's 50th anniversary.
I would just.
Well, Mike, you know how most executives say we want it yesterday?
Yeah,
Here at
I
Alcor, we
wanted
want
it.
2 years
Seriously,
ago.
I wanted this 2 years ago, but here we are.
True. I would just point out to my fellow board members, Diane's last bullet about contracts being ready for members to electronically sign and look at. Ball's in our court on that.
Yeah, we're getting ready. Margie and I just started on redoing the application so that we can get that implemented, and your contracts, we'll need those next.
That's fantastic.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Rudy has a question, Diane. He wants to know, will the electronic signatures handle the notary question?
We don't have an answer for that just yet. That's being worked on.
Let me temper a bit of expectation here so that we don't get too crestfallen later. We have some indications from research so far, legal research so far, that it might not be possible to electronically sign documents for conveyance of remains, which means we may be able to electronically sign everything in the sign up process right up until the documents that actually authorize Alcor to do the cryopreservation in terms of having legal authority to do it. There may be some of those documents that can be e-signed, but it may be difficult to completely finish arrangements electronically, but we'll do the best that we can.
Right. Well, that concludes all of our presentations, and we are just about on target with the estimated time of this board meeting. Are there any other questions or comments? Let's see, I'll take a couple that have not been addressed yet. CT scans are known to damage living bodies because they emit radiation. Are we sure they don't harm the patients? Brian, this sounds like it's right up your alley.
Yeah, my PhD was actually in medical physics, so I could talk about what radiation does to living things until the cows come home. Even in a perfectly, normally functioning human being, the biological consequence of one whole body CT scan is to create a 1 in 1,000 incidence in cancer in the following 30-year time period. So the effect is actually pretty minor, even in normally functioning people at normal temperature. At low temperatures, the effect is actually mitigated even further because the free radicals generated by ionizing radiation can't diffuse around. And then, to top it all off, we have to put this in context relative to the damage still done by the cryopreservation process itself. The amount of change on a molecular level that's created by the X-ray dose used in CT scans to quantify cryoprotectant penetration is insignificant by comparison. Oh, and here's one other thing that just occurred to me too. I hadn't really thought about the CT scan damage question that much yet, precisely because it's sort of intuitively obvious to me that it's insignificant. But to help you picture this better, the background radiation dose just from the potassium-40 that's naturally present in your own tissues will give you a far larger dose of radiation during a 100-year period of storage as a cryopreserved person than the CT scan that Alcor does at the end of your initial cryopreservation process. So You actually will get more dose just from natural background radiation during the 100 years of storage than you will from the CT scan. So I don't know if that makes the questioner feel any better or worse about it, but it just gives it some context.
Yeah, I should probably add that we do have a FAQ entry which explicitly discusses background radiation, what impact it has, and the fact that, as Brian says, it's negligible. I mean, his intuition is spot on and it's backed up by the numbers.
Thank you, Brian. I acknowledge there's no conceivable way I could have responded to that question. So, and Steve Jackson, I just want to note your comment. We've logged. All right, that concludes our agenda for Alcor's 2021 Annual Strategic Board Meeting. Our next board meeting will be on October 9th, 2021 at 11 a.m. Arizona time. Board, do you have anything else before I call for a motion to adjourn? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you to all of our presenters and guests today. Have a good one.
Bye. So starting in 40 minutes, right?
Yes, are we gonna regroup at 2 o'clock, or do you want to regroup sooner?
2 o'clock seems fine.
Give you time to go to the bathroom and eat? Is
Yep.
that good for everybody? Okay, I'm gonna end this then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.